Now, fittingly, we're beginning today on the topic of AI and impact investing. Bill Gates has compared the development of AI to the creation of the microprocessor, the personal computer, the mobile phone, the internet. And he and many others have said it will change the way we work, we travel, we get our healthcare, we communicate, and will reorientate entire industries. So far this year, 192.7 billion has been invested in AI startups, and 2025 is on track at this stage to be the first time ever that more than half of VC-funded money will go into AI. Now, most of that money is going into those big established companies, and not surprisingly, generative AI is a main driver of that investment growth. We're also, as Dervla was pointing out, having this panel discussion with our distinguished guest speakers at a time of constant talk of an AI revolution and more talk creeping in of an AI bubble. And turning to impact investing, many of our panel wanted to get a definition of that, a clear definition. And thankfully, there's a global body that has facilitated that, because it is investing with the intention of generating positive, measurable, social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. And last year, although it was a challenging year, 33 billion was invested in impact startups, most of that going to climate and clean energy. So we have lots to discuss today, and with this very distinguished panel, in terms of the AI landscape and what meaningful investments can be made in what areas. So without further ado, let's introduce them. We are joined today by Martyn Briggs, Director of Bank of America Global Thematic Investment Strategist. We're also delighted to be joined today by Mark Little, who is an entrepreneur and the founder of an impact startup. He is also, incidentally, a former journalist. And finally, we're joined today by Dr. Patricia Scanlon, who also founded an impact startup. She is also chair of Ireland's Independent AI Advisory Council, appointed by the government, and also she is Ireland's official and first AI ambassador. Will you please give them a warm round of applause? So, Martyn, no small question to begin with. From an investor perspective, can you talk to us about the landscape in terms of AI and the overlap with impact investing, and where you see those great opportunities in terms of making impact?
Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. So I'm Martyn Briggs. I'm from the bank's Thematic investing team. And what we do is we look at global megatrends. So trying to predict the future around technology, sustainability and demographics. So to the question, how much of that is going to have an impact? Before, you would see these three buckets of trends, right? Tech trends, sustainability, demographics, and a host of companies that are related to probably one of those big buckets or big themes. Now, you could argue that innovation is actually driving everything. We'll talk a bit today about energy, about healthcare, robotics, automation, etc. Demographic trends, whether it's aging population, healthcare, millennials and Gen Z, consumer trends. Ultimately, a lot of it comes back to innovation. So the last 2 to 3 years, innovation and AI specifically has clearly been the main theme, the main gig in town. All of the numbers that we just heard in the intro, certainly an acceleration of investments. And if we take a step back a bit, 3 years ago, ChatGPT came into our lives. How many of you in the room now have ChatGPT on your phone? Right? A few nervous bank colleagues because we're not allowed it on our bank phones. Don't worry, we're all friends here, right? Now, if we'd have made that type of prediction 3 years ago, I think, I can't remember the number that we predicted when it first came out, but you see now in the digital world, things scale very quickly. You come up with a product, it moves to the world very quickly, and the social media was the first example of that. AI has now been the next in the digital realm. Now, has it really made an impact to our lives, to your lives, etc.? Maybe, maybe not. I'd argue what's coming next, and to your question, Martina, the big impacts we're going to feel from this is when AI is starting to move from the digital realms to the physical. So what do we mean by that? We're starting to see real improvements in energy, I've just been a few weeks ago to a nuclear fusion reactor, so I'm looking a little bit green today. Maybe this could be accelerated because of AI and simulation. That's what they told us. We're seeing areas in robotics and automation. I've just written a report about self-driving cars. That's really being driven by improvements in AI. Now, maybe, Mark, your son's driving license tomorrow wouldn't have been necessary if it would have come a little bit quicker. So the pace of this, we could maybe argue how quickly some of these things are going to come. But to your question, Martina, I think the real impact is going to come when we see impacts to energy, impacts to healthcare, impacts to mobility and transportation, the things in the physical world. ChatGPT didn't build this building, right? As great as it looks, there's areas that AI can accelerate, and we think that the next wave of that will be into the physical domain, and that needs to justify a lot of the huge investments that are starting to take place.
So I take it from that you're saying investors should focus on AI applications. Is that what you're basically saying? And where specifically?
Well, not necessarily. I think so in the short term, I mean, clearly the AI infrastructure trade has been the one that investors are playing, right? So we wrote about this in our report earlier in the year. In the absence of a good title, I just wrote more, right? What do we need for that? We need more compute. We need more energy. We need more water. We need more metals. We need more bandwidth, and we need more human capital. I think there were the 7 areas. So most of the things that we need to facilitate this AI revolution are in those areas specifically. Now, a lot of focus has been on data centers and the energy required to power them. I joked about fusion, but there were, in the short term, you've got a host of technologies that can accommodate this. The mid to long term, when you start talking about tens of gigawatts of power needed for a data center, gets a bit more tricky. So you need gas, or you need nuclear, or you need something else. Now, I think there's breakthroughs that can maybe solve for that, but we're not going to achieve these tens or hundreds of gigawatt energy scale data centers without some form of energy abundance. So for the short term, AI infrastructure has clearly been the main theme, but that's probably only going to be 20-30% of investments. I think our semiconductor team believe about $1.2 trillion will be invested by 2030 in the infrastructure, about $5 trillion cumulatively between now and then. But to justify that, we're going to need to see huge amounts of either productivity savings or new revenue opportunities. And that goes back to some of those areas I was just discussing: energy, healthcare, transportation, materials, etc. And for that, the application layer is still very much open. I think we're still, seeing a lot of competition and new ideas coming from both nimble startups to established key global tech companies alike. And there has been a bit of a race and a FOMO of creating that infrastructure firstly. But at the application layer, I think that's where we're going to see much more disruption and interesting conversations and products that start to come to market very soon.
And I should say, full disclosure, that's where our companies will be developing their applications and tools. Now, in terms of all the talk of hype or revolution or bubbles, what's your take?
So there's obviously the last few weeks in particular. If we'd had this conversation 6 months ago, I'd have said, look, don't worry, we're at the start of a revolution. The internet revolution was 20 years, all of the stuff that was built out then. A lot of companies got burnt in that, but now it's being utilized by companies and is enabling the next wave of technology that we're starting to see. Obviously, in the last few weeks, as I joked a bit about them with energy, the kind of scale and the numbers that are being talked about of the infrastructure required is one challenge. I think the bigger risk is that, either a lot of the companies that are making some of these claims and investments get to a sufficient level of infrastructure or spending and then kind of plateau for a while, and also that those applications that we're all depending on take a little bit longer to commercialize. Obviously, we're in the camp that there are so many AI opportunities in front of us, especially moving from the digital to physical realms, as I said. But of course, any of those, you pick self-driving cars, right? In the report, I mentioned that 2040, you could have a $1.2 trillion market just for the technology in self-driving. And these play in $5 to $10 trillion markets overall. But that needs to be unlocked by AI models that can generalize to new cities much faster and quicker. That is starting to happen now. But that's, I guess, the bigger concern is, can we commercialize enough of these opportunities at a rate to justify that investment? Now, is that a bubble? Is that a hype cycle? I think at the moment it's more driven by, 4 or 5 big tech companies. If your main competitor is investing $20 billion in data centers, then I need to do the same, right? There's a bit of FOMO. To be fair, that's funded by a lot of free cash flow from these big tech companies. The 4 hyperscalers, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta, have spent $200 billion last year on data centers. Apparently, it will be $350 billion this year. Will that continue to double every year for the next 10? Probably not. But that is a bit of a competition race from the tech companies. To justify that, obviously, we're going to need to see more focus on the application layer and who can scale that.
Okay, then moving to you, Mark, because you have founded 2 startups and sold them, and one of which was an impact startup. So can you tell us about Kinsen, which tackled misinformation, and also where you see the greatest opportunity, I suppose, in terms of AI and impact investing and impact startups to make meaningful change over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, and I must admit, like, I'm an accidental AI entrepreneur. Like, I was the kind of person who discovered how it worked in practice, but didn't know how it worked in theory, which is great because it means that when I went in there, I didn't have the kind of magic beans view of AI that it can solve everything. So what happened was myself and my colleague Anya Kerr, we'd worked together, my first startup. We had gone to work for Facebook in her case and Twitter in my case. And we just wanted to unravel the damage done by algorithms in the first unconscious wave of AI, right? Generative, the algorithmic AI. And we sort of invented an app that allowed an ordinary citizen to have their own algorithms. But in the process, we stumbled across, it was 2017, the transformer architecture that has accelerated companies like AI, which essentially allowed us as a small startup, impact funded, publicly funded, some private money as well, to use open and collaborative models. At that time, BERT was the big one we remember, was natural language processing in the hands of a tiny startup in Dublin. These open models and the kind of gift economy of collaboration was accelerating this architecture to the point where we suddenly realized we could, with a small team in Dublin, analyze vast amounts of audio video content to find the most dangerous content on the web. So for example, we could analyze the behavior of neo-Nazi groups that are trying to recruit people out of the militaries in Europe by tracking their language, their use of music, their use of imagery. Find when ISIS was using religious music to try and recruit people to terrorist cells. And the machine was working with the human in reinforcement learning. And we were developing really quickly ways of doing this. Spotify saw this, came along, after we'd worked with many platforms, bought us. So we were a classic success story in terms of Irish impact, right? Two people coming from platforms based in Ireland, leave, hire really good engineers, which probably 15, 20 years ago would have been a rarity, to build an open source technology system that goes to one of the biggest companies in the world with massive recommendation systems and expertise in algorithms, who then invested in an R&D center in Ireland, right? So classic story. Looking back, it's not to say that I'm not very proud of that, but I now realize some mistakes we made. And I think the first one was, again, thinking that we could get AI to give us some competitive advantage we didn't have. And I remember going to Spotify during due diligence and mentioned, yeah, we're a tech company. They're like, you're not a tech company. You're a data company. They had all the engineers in the world. They had all the AI in the world. They needed pure data optimized for a specific purpose, which they got from us. The second thing I realized was that our impact was actually restricted by the fact that we worked eventually inside a closed walled garden. Whereas if we had gone with the initial instinct, and we couldn't have known it then, but I know it now, we could have been building for citizens directly. Tools that would have then allowed them to have control over their environment, not to make the big mistakes that we've seen with content moderation. And so if we trusted our instincts about AI being a radically decentralizing force in society, that I think right now for me is the critical thing that we're missing in the conversation. We have a vertical stack of AI with like a Jenga tower built with these companies with $1.2 trillion in debt right now. If they collapse, they don't take away AI, because on the horizontal plane, we have the application of open weight or open source models, small, perfectly formed, applied AI that can be used for groundbreaking innovation. And finally, I think, well, public interest innovation to help society move as fast as these big tech companies. And that missing piece, I think, for me in impact investing right now is a focus on this vast horizontal plane of open innovation. Right now, we're all victims of companies that are so desperate for revenue. They don't have impact in mind. They want to put more slop on social media networks, a sign of absolute desperation. And for me, that's almost a bigger fear than the collapse of the industry itself.
And actually, you've dealt there with the opportunities and the risks. We have a very balanced panel, you will know today. And now we're going to turn to someone who set up a company in 2013 when an event like this would not have been happening, and certainly the attendance would not have been happening. She was a female founder with an academic background, and she set up an impact startup that was commercially focused as well. And from there, you sold SoapBox Labs 2 years ago, and you are now in an official role in terms of your chair of the Independent AI Advisory Council, but you're also the AI Ambassador for Ireland. So first of all, can you tell us about your impact company and what it achieved? Because both of you did make a financial return for your investors, which is also important today. But can you tell us about that and where you see the opportunities, Patricia?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, much like Mark, we built an impact company, and it was very intentional from the beginning. Back in 2013, people didn't understand what AI was. It was a difficult conversation to have with people. Like it was really trying to imagine the future. Speech recognition or voice AI. I mean, Siri was on phones, but it was absolutely terrible. So again, trying to convince people of the evolution of AI. This is an evolutionary technology that gets better. You could say that today. If you're doubting it today, wait 6 months, wait a month, wait 2 weeks. It changes over time. So to try and explain that concept to people back in 2013 was very difficult, right? I'd been in the area of AI for about 20 years at that point, 15, 20 years. And I had seen how big tech approach AI. And I also had a young daughter who I recognized, and all these apps that would teach literacy or language learning, and I identified quite a big gap by reconciling my own experience in academia, doing a PhD in AI, and how big tech work, that they would never be able to fully address this issue around children's voices and how they speak differently. And the idea was to build deep tech, right? So this is proprietary technology. We weren't riding on anybody's coattails. We built it from the ground up ourselves. It had to be, because the very reasons why big tech couldn't address it is because they approached it in a very different way. And I won't get into bore everybody with the details of it. But the idea was to build technology that would recognize children's voices and help them in their reading journeys, their literacy or their language learning. And literacy being one of the biggest unlocks in anybody's life, their potential. So to be able to help kids across the world. So number one, the idea was we were building the intel inside. We weren't building the end user products. We were building the AI technology that all companies could use. But key to this, and this maintained to layer on the impact focus we had, we knew back in 2013 it was a wild west when it came to data, right? We were saying it was a data problem. And we decided, even though we didn't really have to at the time, we wanted to be on the right side of history when it came to data privacy, that we went out and we spent a bit more and we had to go a little slower to make sure that we were preserving the data rights of kids and their parents, right? To be able to do that took a little bit more infrastructure, took a little bit more time, but we knew we could always stand over those data rights. And we also recognize the fact that not everybody speaks the same. So if you're in a classroom, you're going to have socioeconomic differences. You're going to have language, dialect. A lot of that, right, is, due to economic differences from where people come from. It's due to countries they come from, whether English is a first language, second language. And we reckon if we were going to build AI technology, it had to work for every child in the classroom. You couldn't discriminate against one small or big group in the class. Number one, it's not the right thing to do ethically. And number two, it's a product that doesn't work for everybody. And I still see this today in all forms of AI when people struggle with why they need to deal with bias. It's a very real problem commercially and ethically. So we decided to hit all those three things. Again, we took a lot of, we took investment over the years. We had to seek out grants. A lot of people really struggled with the idea of AI and speech recognition for children. Who would ever want that? So to be able to address those things commercially and have impact is entirely possible. And to be honest, when I hear people say it's one or the other, or it's a philanthropy exercise, it is not. If you think about developing a product that only works for certain sectors of society, you're not being very commercially minded in how the product would ultimately. You're kind of rushing to market, and we're seeing a lot of this right now. We're seeing this almost arms race to get stuff to market and ignoring the impact on society, because it's kind of a hope that it won't come back and bite anybody in the ass. The EU have tried to regulate on this. They're getting huge pushback. We're very concerned about how the pace of that is going. And there is a lot of concerns, right? We're looking at certain economies that do not want to regulate at all. And then we're going to rely on companies to be able to do that themselves when they utterly fail to do so with social media. So we have to be super careful. And the reason I wanted to come here today and speak on the panel was because social impact investing is so important. Because there are so many people throwing money at LLMs, at data infrastructure, at all these different aspects in this arms race. And there is actually very little money being put on accountability, on assessment of bias, on developing those impact applications, such as education, such as climate. So you probably see it yourselves when you're looking at it. There's such a disparity in funding going into these different areas. So true social impact investing is not just, can we find something in the deck that kind of ticks the box for impact, or can we truly find something that will help level the playing field in education, really make a difference in climate change, make a difference in people's lives in healthcare, address those economic differences. They're out there. There's tons of companies out there, and it's really important we find them and support them, particularly on a convention like this to talk about it.
And it's also important because the 17 SDGs, they're not on track to be achieved by 2030, which is a sad indictment. Can I ask all of you, very briefly, one or two sentences, what area do you see that AI could make the most meaningful impact in the next 5 to 10 years that you would like to see it make?
I think there's going to be more of an overlap between energy and transport. They're the two areas that I'd highlight. Just briefly, I think on the energy front, we're going to see the use of things like virtual power plants, bringing online distributed energy resources that AI can arbitrage to supply and demand. Why does that link to transport? You've got bottlenecks of energy for electric charging now, autonomous vehicles in the future, and I think that could be solved also with AI. And then finally, it will unlock some of the more dramatic material science breakthroughs in areas like fusion that's starting to happen, and that's why 50 or so companies are rushing to try and do that.
Mark, because you're an optimist and a skeptic, because you were a journalist and you're an entrepreneur. So where do you see?
Yeah, I would like an upgrade to the true superintelligence, the most ancient one called democracy, which is where we all get together and make decisions as a group that are more smart and better, more effective than as individuals. And we are at the moment working in a situation where we're moving at 21st century pace, even 22nd century pace, and we're still in democracy working levers that were set for us in the 18th and 19th century. So what we have to do is find a way to help democracy else get its upgrade in terms of civic innovators moving in to help things like, and while Elon Musk had a bad attempt at this, improving the quality of delivery of services, making sure we have better deliberative democracy, like the citizen assemblies we had in Ireland, which can be actually helped and powered by AI, many experiments happening right now, and also the great decentralization of power to citizens that will be happening and has been accelerated right now. And I think a lot about the literacy idea. So what fundamentally that is about is, we talk about redistribution of wealth, UBI, giving people windfall taxes to get us over the hump, society kind of quieting down. We need to think a lot more about the pre-distribution of the vital assets that are important with AI. For example, AI literacy, access to compute, to digital public infrastructure, and also as citizens having the power to be more active and empowered in society. If we don't have innovation in that, it's not about doing good, it's also about moving at the pace of the technology, making society, I think, feel able to move at this accelerated pace. Because right now, the biggest threat to democracy in places like the United States and Europe is people feeling that they don't understand the future. They have no power over it. In the United States today, 30,000 people die while waiting for disability payments, right? So the government is not responsive. And that is, I think, a great danger to the really innovative stuff that obviously Martyn has talked about right here. We underestimate the need to upgrade that superintelligence, because it's not about a singularity, it's about plurality. And if we can't get that right, we will not move, because ultimately society will push back against what is, I think, a liberating and empowering technology.
Okay, and Patricia?
I think when there's so many great areas like education and medicine and things like that, but I actually get a visceral reaction when I see AI being used in to help biodiversity, to help modelling of climate change, to help the people who are investing in data centres and infrastructure understand the impact on the environment. And there's some great companies out there. They're using more sophisticated models to be able to predict into the future, to demonstrate to people, because unfortunately, as much as we talk about climate change, until people see it impacting their pockets, you're not seeing a lot of change. And there was a great company that was using advanced AI models to demonstrate to insurance companies the impact of climate on buildings. So you can see then that impact having influence then, the cycle that's going on for a couple of years in government, in policy making, in regulation. But people have to feel it. So there is a huge amount of damage that can be caused by AI in terms of data centre. If we don't get the sustainability and the renewable energies sorted, the data centre thing is not the issue, it's the power, the grid. But being able to do it sustainably is achievable. But again, that just running head forward into it, saying we must do AI, we must do data centre, we must do infrastructure. I agree, Ireland needs to, because we're going to lose otherwise. But that massive investment in renewables and sustainables has to happen first. So there is a lot of, AI can help with that too. So when I see those advances coming and those changes, again, they need to be invested in more. Too much money has been thrown at the LLMs. So much is going to be lost. And I just want to make a quick point about this AI bubble that everybody keeps talking about. When there was the internet bubble, the internet didn't go away. It's not a reason to be skeptical about the technology itself. It's the overvaluations. And again, you're going to get a lot of people fearful now and pulling back a little bit. It's to find those opportunities that are sustained, that do have the value, and possibly not in the LLM space that we just keep chucking money at and hoping to God that's what's happening.
Okay, does anyone have a question? We've time for one for our panel.
It's that first panel of the day.
It's too early. It's like class. Does anyone, one question, or I'll pick someone out. Alan, would you like to start the ball rolling?
It's fine. Like you, Alan, for the really insight discussion. But what are you, I need to touch on this a little bit. What are you most fearful about? Saying to the AI, touching it, someone, and where do you see Ireland's role in the global AI base?
Okay, so for everyone who couldn't hear that, what are you most fearful in terms of AI, and where is Ireland's role in the AI race?
I'd say I can jump in quickly. I mean, on the risk side of it, one thing I forgot to mention is twofold really. You see a lot of proliferation of cybercrime, right? Last few weeks, that's proliferating. AI is helping, I guess, to proliferate attacks at a much faster cadence. There are solutions for that. There's a very investable area in cyber companies that can mitigate some of the threat. But I think that is one of the risks that AI is helping to accelerate. I think the bigger picture one I'd highlight, though, is geopolitics. I forgot to mention it earlier on, but we were talking a bit about it backstage, is that you've got a perceived race here, right? Tech race, US and China in particular. So what does that mean for Ireland? What does that mean for the UK? What does that mean for France, etc.? That is also fueling a lot of the regulatory changes that are happening in anything, whether it's AI, self-driving, all of the areas that are related to tech trends, to so-called win that AI race. So that there's positives to that, building out the infrastructure, making the investments, making some of the changes, but there's also risks on, to actually accelerate the usefulness of this internationally. It's not going to be a US-China dominated game. It needs to be collaborative and needs to, benefit stakeholders internationally in Europe, Middle East, Africa, etc. Maybe you're probably a better place to comment on Ireland.
So briefly, Mark and Patricia.
One of the mistakes I know entrepreneurs always make and investors always make is you think that you come up and you fall in love with your solution and you don't understand your problem. So in many ways with environment, sustainable energy, for example, big problems are battery power. So the real choke point is actually, can AI help make batteries more efficient than necessarily creating a new form of energy? And that's really impact investing, rather than thinking about the magic solution. Like there's a great, Hannah Fry, the mathematician, has a great line, the magic test. If you get a pitch deck and someone uses the word artificial intelligence and you can replace it with the word magic and the deck still makes sense, they're talking bollocks, right? And I think we're at that stage right now where too many people are chasing solutions and not looking at the choke points that are stopping really impactful applications of AI. Secondly, the concentration of power is making the big companies do strange, weird, and not good things. And unless we have a countervailing power, I think we may need that bubble to burst before we start moving on that kind of more horizontal.
And Patricia?
In the short term, there is an issue around jobs and where the money is being spent, where the efficiencies are being got. It's a little bit coupled with the AI bubble about can we realise the efficiencies? But there's a severe lack of knowledge and data about real time. It's moving at a pace we've never seen before. And the problem is we're having to make policies, we're regulating, we're trying to, Ireland, I'll talk about mainly here, is we're trying to make decisions based on historic data from a year or two ago, or, very slow pace while the pace of change. People are looking at economic data, around jobs and skills from about 6 months, a year ago, when we all know the AI models were so different. The impact was barely felt, it's been felt now. So one of the things we're doing with the AI Council, we've proposed an AI observatory. And the AI observatory is to work with a number of big tech companies around data, work with state companies as well, working with a lot of different public and private data in order to be able to generate real-time economic insights with respect to skills, jobs. So we in Ireland, very Ireland Pacific, can do that dynamic policy making. And we've been very good at policy making, regulation. That's very much our skills that we need to lean into more. But to be able to do that at a pace that's realistic for the pace of AI. And I think that is something Ireland can do and Ireland needs to do. And potentially the rest of the world can follow. But we're very unique in a couple of aspects that we can achieve this. And I think that's one mitigating factor for a very real problem that's right in front of us.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Martyn, Mark, and Patricia, for your insights and for your expertise and also different perspectives. And that's really important on a panel like this to kick off this day. And given how quickly the technology is moving, it'll be very interesting to see where all of these views stack up in 12 months' time, let alone in 5 years' time. Thank you very much. And this is being recorded, so you will be able to look back and check on their advice. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was to Martina, Mark, Patricia and Martyn for really setting the scene. And it's so interesting to see the extent to which the issues that are being discussed in this panel are going to feed into future EU and US trade agreements. There's a lot of noise about that too.